Welcome to the Friar's Corner. Let's talk about spiritual life.
The Friar's Corner.
What is the spiritual life? Well, simply put, the spiritual life is an awareness of and deepening of the life of sanctifying grace in the soul. You see, when we were baptized, sanctifying grace, the divine life as it were, entered our soul, making us adopted sons and daughters of God. When we begin to earnestly respond to this gift of sanctifying grace, we can say that we've embarked on the journey of the spiritual life. For St. Teresa, this is the point of departure, the second dwelling place. But how do we respond to this gift? I'm sure some of you will say prayer. Well, yes, but that's not the full story. The spiritual life is actually made up of many parts. Let's go into some of them by first looking at the two primary movements of the spiritual life, the ascetical phase, the mystical phase. The ascetical phase gets its name from the Greek word askesis, meaning training. Here, the person puts in a lot of his or her own effort, sort of like an athlete training for a competition, but in this case, training for the spiritual life by fasting, spiritual exercises, and so on. In the mystical phase, human effort becomes overshadowed by the divine effort, and God begins to take over. Within these two phases or movements are the various aspects or parts of the spiritual life. We have prayer, for example, that conversation between the soul and God. And as the conversation becomes more and more intimate, we do less of the talking and do more of the listening. But the life of prayer isn't contained in itself. It overflows into one's moral and ethical life. The more one comes closer to God, the more one leaves sin behind. Our life choices begin to favor God more and more. How does that work? Well, when sanctifying grace entered our soul, it brought along with it virtues. These are stable habits that incline us towards goodness. These are the three theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity, and four cardinal virtues of prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude. As if these were not enough, in God's generosity, He also gave us 7 additional gifts that strengthen and perfect these virtues. These are the gifts of the Holy Spirit: wisdom, understanding, knowledge, counsel, piety, fear of the Lord, and fortitude. Unfortunately for most of us, these gifts remain latent, sleeping as it were. However, when we respond to the life of grace by prayer and exercise of the virtues, these gifts begin to bud and flower as if watered by the spring rains. If I might use the analogy of flying a plane, we begin the flight by being the pilot and God as the co-pilot. But as the spiritual life begins to take shape and soar, the roles are reversed. God becomes the pilot and takes us to heights we can never reach by our own effort. So really, the spiritual life in a nutshell is a meeting point of all these elements: prayer, the theological and cardinal virtues, the gifts of the Holy Spirit, supported by divine grace in the sacramental life, all overflowing into the fruits of the Holy Spirit and one's actions in the moral and ethical life. And of course, the Beatitudes. It is a life that spirals slowly but ever so surely upward, as long as we cooperate with grace. It is a beautiful life.